Go ahead and get started. So everyone, welcome to the April Makerspace meeting. So this Makerspace is an outgrowth of the Sustainable Tennessee program from the Tennessee Environmental Council, where we can come together online. I know it's a crazy time. So I'm glad that folks are here, and I hope everyone's well, and we're excited about today and the guest speaker that we have. So today we have with us Chet Hunt. So he is the immediate past chairman of the Knoxville Chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby, and he's a man that has done many different things in the climate space. So he is a passionate climate activist here to share with us today his thoughts on a number of different going-ons in the climate space, and I know that sometimes our work is siloed, so hopefully his perspective will enrich our knowledge of what is going on in that space and thinking about how we can apply it to our work regardless of what it may be. And so with that, Chet, I can give you the floor, and I'm trying to think, and we'll have time at the end for questions, but Chet said that you can ask a question throughout the presentation, and I'll be looking at the chat, so if you want to type a question, please feel free to do so. So with that, Chet, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm in East Tennessee, so it's 1 o'clock here. The presentation is going to be a PowerPoint presentation. There's no audio. It's strictly a visual presentation, and I'll narrate it the best I can. Some of this, I'm sure those of you who've been involved in the climate movement for a while have heard some of this stuff. Hopefully, it won't be too redundant and that you'll learn some new things, or at least some new perspectives on issues that you're familiar with. And as Shelby indicated, please feel free to ask a question as we go along. And I'll let Shelby worry about the time constraints that we're under, and I'll yield to her cues on that. Yeah, my name's Chet Hunt. I live in Knoxville. I've been very active with the Citizens Climate Lobby. I'm chairman of the chapter of the Climate Reality Project here. I'm also chairman of the American Promise Association of Knoxville, which is an organization dedicated to getting big money out of politics. The reason I got involved in that is because I saw the obstruction occurring, for climate change policy. Every time something was beginning to move, there would be an obstruction in Congress, and then when you trace all that down, you follow the money, you see the oil industry and other special interests related to the fossil fuel interests are obstructing that via the Congress folks that are supposed to represent us. But in any case, that's why I got involved in that. So we've got to get the money out of there. I'll start the presentation here. Hopefully everybody can see it. Can everybody see this? Okay. Yeah, everybody's on mute, it looks like.
I can see it.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I'm getting other affirmatives from folks. Yes.
Okay. All right. For some reason it's not unlocked. There we go. There we go. As you know, climate change is real. There are still people occasionally I run into who say it's not real, or they say, yeah, the climate has always changed, but it's not really us. You probably heard those responses yourselves. But it is us. And one thing about this current coronavirus situation we're in, it's becoming very clear that it's us. because the atmosphere is beginning to clean itself a great deal. And wildlife is beginning to move back into the urban centers and places that we never see them. So if our extinction occurs, all other flora and fauna will flourish. I mean, that's become very obvious. We're in a bad situation, though. I don't want to, create a big downer for everybody today, because there is hope. There are solutions, as many of you are aware, I'm sure. But we are in big trouble. If we don't do something in the next 10 years, our civilization is going to change, and it's going to change dramatically, because those are the projected tipping points that the IPCC report talks about and all the scientists talk about. And there's many of those tipping points, or feedback loops, as they're commonly called. our atmosphere is just a delicate, thin layer around the Earth. You know, you look up and you think this, you know, there's this vast reservoir that exists there, but it's not really in relationship to the Earth, the racial relationship to the Earth. So it's very thin, and one way to look at it is it's thinner than the skin on an apple in relationship in terms of that ratio. And we are continuing to spew 110 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into this thin shell every 24 hours as if it were an open sewer. This is showing, you'll see the temperature change from the Industrial Revolution up to about 2018, showing that our house is on fire, as Greta so commonly tells us. And it's interesting, if you see, the heat is being concentrated at the poles more than any place else. This is called the Arctic death spiral. I don't know if you've seen this graph before, but it's a very interesting graph. It's done by the Polar Science Center at Washington State University. They've been studying the polar ice caps and the ice sheets for a long time. And as you can see, you know, the ice is melting. You know, the mass, the volume is diminishing, and it's very clear when you track this over each month and over the years from 1979 up to 2017, this represents. These are NASA satellite images of the poles, of the North Pole, in September of 1984 and September of 2016, and it's very clear that it's shrinking, which coincides with the death spiral I just showed you. Other indicators that the climate is changing are this, you know, plethora of wildfires happening all over the globe. This is one that's local here. This happened in Gatlinburg 2 years ago. Probably read about that if you're not from East Tennessee. I'm sure you're aware of it. But it was horrific. And it doesn't matter if this fire was started by arsonists, campfires, kids playing with matches, or a lightning strike. What matters is that the conditions were set because of climate change for this to occur, no matter who starts it or how it starts. The property damage was, you know, in the millions and millions. You know, this was Paradise, California, and some of the other western areas where we've been having wildfires. I mean, it's just leveling things. Australia, this was the most recent one we've been hearing about that was, you know, it was just massive. And it was moving towards Sydney, you know, towards the coast, and had it pinned in. And people were terrified that it was going to get to them. This is a view of the road and the vegetation on the left, and then after the fire, what it looked like. Floods are another one. One in Mozambique 2 years ago. The one in Knoxville a year ago, last February. You know, in the Midwest, Nashville, for those of you in Nashville, you remember this one. Texas. You know, as the oceans warm, it puts more moisture into the atmosphere. We get these rain bombs, you know, these deluges of water out of the atmosphere that we have not been seeing. And that's why these floods are occurring so often and to such degree. This was a hurricane that devastated Puerto Rico. In the Bahamas, most recent one. It's just like a nuclear bomb went off. And it's so horrible because it's not what it only does to property, but it's the effect that it has on humanity. You know, these people that live there are traumatized. They'll suffer from PTSD the rest of their lives. And the cost, economic costs. Right now, this is showing the electricity generation in the United States by the different sectors. At the bottom, you'll see that hydropower is pretty well flatlined. You know, they're not going to allow any more dams because of the environmental impact they've learned that dams create. So hydropower is pretty well flat. It's at 6.8%. You see a slight uptick in wind and solar, but it's nominal. Good thing is that we're seeing the consumption and use of coal going down. Coal is it's just terrible. Coal is of the devil. So is oil, by the way. But coal is going down, but what's replacing it, as you see, is natural gas. Natural gas has a much lesser content of carbon than coal, but it's still a carbon-based fuel. And you know, the power generation industry is replacing coal-fired generators with these natural gas generators and investing lots of money. And so they're showing, you know, some reduction in carbon emission that they can boast about, but they're going to flatline that. And the problem is, as the population around the world increases, the demand for energy increases, which means the consumption of that will increase correspondingly, thereby putting more emissions into the atmosphere, even though it's a less carbon-based fuel. So we got to get rid of natural gas too, is the short and long of it. Everybody hear me? Okay, good. Okay. But we got to make that wind and solar get bigger. I don't know how you guys feel about nuclear, but nuclear is flatlined too. And it's not only the emissions, but you know, we had this TVA coal ash spill in Kingston. I don't know if you've seen some of this stuff, but it's just devastating, and people are dying right now. Like it was like, I can't remember how many, 800 people are sick with it from this stuff, and dozens have died already. And TVA will not take responsibility, and the engineering firm that they subcontracted to do the cleanup, it's fighting all the accountability that they should accept, as should TVA. Have people tell me, you know, because we're 1 degree Celsius increase in the global temperature, right? The average temperature has gone up around the globe on an average 1 degree Celsius, right? But anyways, even in just Fahrenheit, when people say, well, what does 1 degree matter? That's not very much. 1 degree matters. It changes everything. And 1 degree is melting all the ice caps and all the ice sheets. I took these pictures just last fall when I was up in the Arctic in Alaska. I went up to check on the glaciers, and they're all melting. You can see this is receding back into the passes, and all the fresh water is just running down into Prince William Sound, which goes into the Gulf of Alaska, which is part of the Pacific Ocean. This is why we're having sea level rise. I mean, it's very obvious. It's very sad. The boat that I was on, there were naturalists and park rangers on board, and they said that they remember as kids the glaciers were all the way down to the water and out into the water. You see them moving up the mountains and up into the pass. And if you've been to Glacier National Park lately, you know there's no glaciers. We're so far back into the passes, it's hard to even ever see them. And of course, this fresh water changes the chemistry of the water. When I went to Canada in Vancouver and went out to the San Juan Islands to do some whale watching, and I talked to the naturalists there. They're very worried about this because it's changing the chemistry of the Northern Pacific, and that affects the plankton. And of course, plankton is the primary source of food for the whales. So you can see everything is interconnected. And you begin these feedback loops.
Chet, I wanted to stop you a second. We're at the 20-minute mark, so we have about 20 minutes left overall. So I just wanted to let you know about that.
Thank you. Okay, in 1941, here was a glacier in Alaska. And in 2004, it's gone. You can see it receding back up into the past there. Kilimanjaro is melting. You can see where the ice cap line was. See where it's light down below the peak of the mountain? You can see how it's receded. There's 1993, in just 7 years, look how much it changed. Of course, Greenland's ice loss is it's just really scary. From 1992 to 2001, they only lost 34 gigatons, but from 2002 to 2011, they lost 215 gigatons. And this chart shows the decline of the ice mass in Greenland. It's just going down, down, down. Of course, that all melts, goes into the sea, gushes into it. This is something that people have to become very familiar with that are really trying to do something about climate change and encourage some effective policies. This is a pie chart showing foundations where special interests have weaponized philanthropy to combat any kind of movement toward rectifying climate change. They call it the counter movement. And these organizations are spending millions and millions, and they're hiring professional firms, you know, public relations firms, and what they call merchants of doubt, to create, you know, doubt about the science, to create doubt about climate change. And they use some of the same firms that the tobacco industry used back when the tobacco industry was fighting the science that says that it's causing cancer. Some of you are too young to remember that, but I'm sure you've read about it. But I remember them doing commercials on television using doctors and athletes reporting the consumption of tobacco, and having charts with the chest area and a T drawn on it, and a physician pointing at it saying, "Camels, good for the T-zone." Now we all know it's common knowledge that it causes cancer, heart disease, and everything else. But these folks are serious, because if we start moving to correct climate change, that means ending the fossil fuel consumption around the world, which affects their industry. And there's no silver bullet, but there are solutions. There is hope. One is the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. Are you familiar with that? It's a bill pending in Congress right now. It's called HR 763. It already has 80 co-sponsors on it. This will reduce carbon consumption by increasing the cost on carbon per metric ton every year by an increment of $10 per metric ton. So it starts out at a rate of, I think it's $15 or $20 a metric ton, and every year it goes up $10. And so it doesn't shock the economy, but it begins to signal that, hey, the profit motive will want to drive down their costs as this starts picking up. And that means they will be looking at cheaper sources in the supply chain for energy. And we know that solar and wind is already becoming competitive, and it's going to be a cheaper alternative for them. So the economic pressure is probably the best way to begin to reduce carbon, and fast, on the scale that we need it to happen at. This should be obviously in the portfolio of the Green New Deal, and should probably be the spearhead. Because once you start this, then all the other things will begin to fall in place. 3,554 of our top economists in the country have signed on to this idea of pricing carbon as the best way to reduce carbon emission. 4 of them were chairs of the Federal Reserve. 27 are Nobel Peace Prize receivers. 15 were former chairs of the Council of Economic Advisors. 2 were former secretaries of the U.S. Department of Treasury, advisors to the presidents. So, and guided by sound economic principles, they say we are united in the following policy recommendations. A carbon tax offers the most cost-effective lever to reduce carbon emissions at the scale and speed that is necessary. A carbon tax should increase every year until emissions reduction goals are met and be revenue neutral to avoid debates over the size of government. That's why HR 763, the bill I was telling you about, is so important because it's revenue neutral. They collect the revenues off the tax on carbon and they return it to the citizens of the United States in the form of a dividend. So it goes back to the citizens of the United States based on family size, not income, but family size. Actions we can take, we must demand, not ask, not request. We must demand. We have to become disobedient. We have to get really active here. I mean, this is serious. We're talking about the very existence of humanity. Now, this is no joke. So we must demand that cities, counties, states, and the federal government develop coordinated, comprehensive climate action plans that are aligned with the IPCC guidelines. Knoxville is doing that. Knoxville has already unanimously adopted, City of Knoxville, City Council adopted last winter carbon reduction goals that are aligned with the IPCC guidelines. And now the mayor is appointing a climate council to help begin the process of devising a climate action plan to begin action steps to achieve those carbon reduction goals. But that needs to be done at all levels. Knox County is going to be very difficult because the mayor of Knox County is a climate denier. But we got to get active and we got to exert political pressure and political will. Federal legislation to rapidly reduce carbon emissions, that's HR 763. We got to end fossil fuel subsidies and advocate disinvestment in the fossil fuel industry. That means from pensions, universities, your banks, the people that you're using credit cards. If they're investing and subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, you got to change and you got to tell them why you're changing. Incentivize carbon capture and sequestration and drawdown as we transition to renewables, because there's a legacy carbon in the atmosphere that even if we went to zero carbon right now, we've still got so much in the atmosphere that it's still going to continue to warm the planet. So we got to draw it down and sequester that. Incentives for transitioning to clean energy, which could also include tax credits and buybacks to purchase electric vehicles. We've got to move to electric vehicles. Transportation is the largest component in the pie of emissions. Used to be a power generation, but now it's transportation. So we've got to move away from internal combustion engines. Tax credits for home efficiency methods, whether it's solar panels, whether it's highly efficient HVAC, utility incentives such as rebates for home electric car hookups. KUB, the Knoxville Utility Board here, has provided a subsidy, excuse me, $400 if you do an electric hookup in your home to be able to charge electric vehicles. We need to be doing more of that. TVA should be included in all this. An end to elected officials accepting fossil fuel industry money and move to public funded political financing. It gets back to where I was telling you with that pie chart of those foundations, funding, these campaigns to discredit scientists and to disseminate false information. An amendment to the obsolete TVA Act of 1933. The TVA Act is obsolete. TVA has achieved the mission it was essentially designed to meet during the New Deal, okay? It created power, economic development, flood control, all those things that it was charged with during the Roosevelt era. But now it needs a new mission. We are in a new era in this country, and the social needs and the economic needs are different, and TVA is not meeting those. And they have no accountability the way they were designed. Okay, they're appointed by the president. The governing board is appointed by the president and only reviewed by the Senate. The House of Representatives has no say-so in this. So once they're appointed, this board has no accountability. And they've been abusing this for years and years and years. So, and they're not moving towards renewables. They keep fighting it, okay? So we got to put pressure on our Congress to amend the TVA Act, give it a new mission, and help it, make it, help the country transition to clean energy. This should be part of the Green New Deal. And in addition to doing that, we need to do the corresponding infrastructure project that includes a smart grid.
And Chet, let me interrupt you right there. We have about 8 minutes left, and I do want to mention two things that came into the chat. One relates to TVA, so I wanted to say it here. So someone made the comment that the energy chart that you shared earlier showed nuclear power at 19%, but TVA generates 40% of its energy with nuclear power. So that's an important thing for us to consider as Tennesseans. And then also there was a question out of the chat related to a question. So can you supply the link to the latest data showing transportation is now highest emitter segment? So Chet, you can share that with me and I can make sure that the group gets that source, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you could just Google that, you could find it. You could probably find it on the NASA or NOAA websites, or, there's a lot of places you can find that.
And then also FYI for everyone, this presentation is being recorded, so everything that Chet has shared, we can make available, we will make available to you all and then other Tennessee Environmental Council supporters. Excuse me, go ahead, Chet, because we have about 6 minutes left.
Okay, and the smart grid and storage, that's the shortcoming right now, it's storage, because of the variability of renewables. So we've got to develop our storage systems, hold fossil fuel industry liable for what they've done. We need to employ effective city building and town planning so that we employ proper land use. And we need to support the Green New Deal. Cities are planning for climate change. Those that are more progressive and aware, they're creating much more efficient urban systems, the way they form cities, the way they lay it out, the way they treat density, the way they treat land use, the way they use building materials, the way they're retrofitting old buildings, and also vegetation, creating microclimates throughout the city, doing vertical gardening as well as neighborhood gardening, transit-oriented development, converting public transit to electric vehicles, electric buses, and so forth. This is a building I saw when I was in Milan. I'll give you an example. This is people doing organic gardening in the city of Detroit, neighborhood gardening. I'm also an organic gardener too. I would encourage all of you to do some of that if you've got room in your backyard, begin organic gardening. And as far as sequestration and helping to clean the atmosphere, one of the best ways to do that is to reforest the planet. And people are beginning to do that, but we need to be more aggressive about this. Electric vehicles are becoming much better. They're becoming much more stylish, much more efficient, and much more affordable. And these people give me hope. This was in Maryville when we were doing the climate strike last September. This is a conference of the Citizens Climate Lobby. There were 2,000 people at this conference last year. This is us on the state capitol steps during lobby day. We actually lobby Congress. We spend the whole day broken into teams. We meet with all the senators and all the House of Representatives. Climate Reality Project. Even some of our, our celebrities are becoming civil, doing civil disobedience. They're getting arrested, and gladly so, happily so. This was a climate strike in the United Kingdom. This was at UT last year. And of course, the prophets are crying out in the wilderness. She's amazing. She's our Joan of Arc, our modern day Joan of Arc. So planning, we must formulate comprehensive climate action plans at every level of government. And with your help, we can beat this crisis. I mean, there are solutions. If we did it over the next 5 to 6 years, it would just begin to make, dramatic changes. I mean, look what this virus has done, just, pinning us up for a month, what it's doing. If we begin to, truly and effectively transition to clean energy, it would just be amazing what would happen. But if we don't, we're doomed. So that's the short and long of it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Hi, Chet. I'm Maris.
Hello, Maris. Hi. Hi.
Hey, how you doing? This is awesome. Thanks so much. I guess after watching the presentation, I was actually going to the Climate Reality Change Conference in Vegas before it got canceled this year. I was really stoked to do that. Currently looking into some other programs, but I guess to build off of what you were saying, solution-wise, what are some of the things that you suggest, or maybe like we can also get this information from you via email afterwards, but who are the people that we need to be writing to? Who are the people that we need to be making known? Because that's the hardest part, is people will talk about recycling and doing things proactively in their homes all day, but it's not really doing much because we're not bringing it up to the government level, and we're not. I myself am very inexperienced in that way, and I would really like to know where to start with that. So,
okay, let me say this: the Green New Deal is something. It's a concept. There are no specific policy, no specific legislation within that portfolio yet. It's a concept. So I see the Green New Deal as a portfolio of different action steps that need to be taken. Okay, one is carbon pricing.
Yeah.
Everybody that I talk to, in terms of the scientists and economists that I interact with, say carbon pricing is the most effective thing we can do. There's nothing wrong with recycling. We recycle, we need to do that too. We need to be doing organic gardens in our backyard and all those kinds of things, because the food supply and agriculture has to change as well. I didn't go into all that other stuff. There's so much to this. But anyways, all those things are important, but we need something that's far reaching and has the scope that's necessary to make a dramatic change, and that is carbon pricing. The economic pressure is the best way to achieve that, okay? And so through public policy, we can tax carbon, but it's what you do with that money, okay? So that's why all the economists say, for it to be politically palatable, you've got to return that money back to the citizens and not increase the size of government. That money should not go to government. If you tax carbon and give that money to government for rebudgeting, what you're doing is creating an inflationary impact that affects the poor more than anybody else. And they can't stand it. So what we need to do is give that money back. I look at it as a form of reparations for what the fossil fuel industry has done to our society. And that's just the start of what they should be held accountable for. But anyways, that money needs to be returned back to the citizens to mitigate the inflationary impact of carbon pricing. So that means lobbying your Congress representatives, your senators, and your House of Representatives. That's what the Citizens Climate Lobby does. We are lobbying. And not just them, we need to be lobbying at every level of government, our city council, our mayor. Why? Because they can begin to make changes locally that then begins to put pressure on the elected officials in Congress and at the state levels. Okay, because we should be doing it at the state level, at the county level. because those are the constituents of the congressional representatives. And when they see that happening at the local levels, that gives them the signal that, hey, I better start getting on this. So the pressure needs to go up. It needs to be top down and bottom up.
So I do want to be mindful of time, but we have a few things coming in the chat that I wanted to take note of. Somebody had a question. So do you have more up-to-date data on organizations financing climate denial? So is that something you can speak to, Chet?
Yeah, it's bits and pieces. I just thought that pie chart was great because it just kind of shows how philanthropy is being weaponized. I mean, they're doing it in other ways too. I mean, there are these nonprofits out there. You probably heard some of them. They're Americans for Prosperity. Have you ever heard of that group? I mean, they're out there, creating legislation and paying these political representatives, these elected officials, to adopt legislation that is for special interests to help the fossil fuel industry.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I thought that pie chart was just a really nice graphic representation that's easy to understand of what they're doing, and it gives you a sense of the scope. And that was just with foundations. I mean, there's other nonprofit organizations they're using, and then they're just using private ones too. I mean, corporations and so forth are all doing this. That's why we got to stop this money going into politics.
So also going back to what you were talking about regarding lobbying, someone from the chat mentioned that the council, so the Tennessee Environmental Council, offered a learning day called Conservation Education Day to help people understand how lobbying works in Tennessee with Stuart Clifton. So he's a lobbyist that works on environmental issues. And he does trainings for organizations. And then also another comment, the best way to engage in lobbying is to form coalitions and collaborations to lobby together. And then someone mentioned a book recommendation, Project Drawdown. So I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but someone else also said that's a great book.
It is. It doesn't talk about carbon pricing or the lobbying so much. It just talks about, the different methods we need to employ to draw down carbon from the atmosphere and sequester it in soils, how we do agriculture, how we do ranching, and so forth. But it's a very, very good book, and I've recommended it many times. But I would also recommend that you visit the Citizens Climate Lobby website. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of resources there, and they are being very effective.
So
I mean, they actually have a bill pending in Congress with 80 co-sponsors on it.
So Chet, with that, if folks are interested in learning more about what you do, or if they have questions later, how can they reach out to you?
Just shoot me an email.
Okay, and what is your email address?
It's chunt, CHUNT 51 at Comcast.net.
Okay, great.
So Hunt for Chet Hunt 51 at Comcast.net.
All right, everyone. Well, we're reaching the end of our time here. And so I thank everyone for coming. Again, this session was recorded, so you can watch it again, share it with folks. And with the presentation content, it's my understanding that some of it is proprietary. So if there's any questions about what you would like to share, please reach out to Chet first. And also he's available to answer questions. But with that, I thank everyone for coming, and just thank you so much, Chet, for coming to speak with us. And do you have any parting words before we leave today?
Yes, like I say, we've got to get serious. We have to get active. I mean, some of us are even talking about doing sit-ins and getting arrested here locally, just to get the media attention. We've got to do something, and it's like who was it that said this? Frederick Douglass said that power concedes nothing without demand.
Okay, that is
we have to demand it.
Okay. a great quote for us to all leave with. So again, thank you all for coming. And this was the April meeting for the Makerspace, brought to you by the Tennessee Environmental Council. So you can check out what we do on our website, tectn.org. And you will hear from me about what we'll be doing in June. I know that the virus has changed a lot of things, but we will continue to move forward. The council is continuing to do great things for the environment here in Tennessee and beyond. So with that, I will end this session, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.